have to let you know that I finally got to take an Avita class with Mark.
With Mark, yeah.
For people in Minnesota, Mark Wheat is the well-known DJ on The Current who just retired a couple years ago and shifted into yoga thanks to you.
Yeah. He
And
spent a year in Boulder with me.
yeah, exactly. And it was so great to like, see because I've known those guys for a while. We got to meet at a
Yeah.
dinner and I've known Marn for probably 7 or 8 years, maybe. It's been a while. So just to see sort of the shift go on with him has been really cool. And I can just and he's just got such a great presence for this kind of work. So it was fun to see.
Oh man, he's so into it.
So I didn't get it. I don't know if because we feel like I got interviewed a little bit at the dinner party that we had. And I didn't get to like learn
Yeah.
quite enough about you, but maybe that worked out just perfectly for
Well, here
us.
we are. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I got, what your background was before you got into this practice of yoga.
Yeah. Well, when that question comes up, where do we really start, right?
Right, right,
When you drop into something you're so passionate about and feel so right, it feels like your entire life was arranged for this, for whatever it is that you're creating or offering to happen.
right,
And
right.
so I'll quickly just say that it really began in my childhood with my dad, who was a rural small town veterinarian. And I had my hands in everything. I was with him constantly, helping him with large and small animals. And so I got this firsthand experience of what it's like on the inside of these bodies
Yeah,
and how muscles respond and how, you know, what organs do underneath inside there and what happens when they're damaged and beat up. And so I just had that firsthand experience and I almost went into medicine, but I kind of got my fill of that. And then I went into business school, not really knowing what I was going to do, but it was I was home for between my junior and senior year of college and stumbled into a yoga class and it just changed my life.
mm,
I was about 21 probably at the time.
yeah.
And it's not just the yoga, but the philosophy behind it. What does yoga mean to join? And I just kept asking that question. That was really the precursor that led to so many cool things down the road.
Yeah. And what did you end up in business school then for a period of time? I mean, sorry, in a business field?
Oh yeah, but I was so clueless. I just was going to school, having a great time going to college and
Yeah,
going to school. And I thought, oh, when I get out, I got this degree and everybody will want me to work for them. And that just wasn't the case. I just was
yeah.
not aligned for what, for certainly for the corporate business world. But those skills kind of help us through life in various ways.
Was this in the 90s when you were in college?
This was in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah.
Yeah. 82 to 86 was my
Okay.
college career.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got out of college in 93 and it was like everybody I knew at that point who had, a specific major, track that they thought they were on. There was just nothing going on in the economy. There were no jobs really available. And all of us somehow ended up in like some creative endeavor or, kind of just creating something for ourselves out of it.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was it was kind of great in that respect. I feel like just because I have, one in college right now, about ready to get out, you kind of see it's just such a different world that they're living in terms of where they're going with everything too. And which, I think there is a loss in there too. I feel like we had this opportunity to maybe spend a little bit more time exploring because of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's college and education is a funny thing. Sometimes it works directly and sometimes indirectly.
Yeah, yeah,
But it ended up I dropped out of the corporate world very quickly and just did a bunch of traveling. I started following my heart
yeah.
and started studying with lots of different yoga teachers around the country and various places. I would just land in ashrams and studios um, every little bit just touched my heart. And I ended up leading bicycle tours for many years
Oh,
and
cool.
eventually ended up back in Boulder about the age of 30. And I'll just say that it was being more direct with your question, what's my background? I had a ski injury that hyperflexed my knee
Hmm.
and could hardly walk for about a week. And I ended up serendipitously in a Rolfing training advanced. It was the first advanced Rolfing training. So all the good senior Rolfers were there, and oh my gosh, their hands on my body and my knee. And that's as you know, Rolfing is
Oh yeah, I've had it done.
working with connective tissue and releasing fascia and all that, and
Yeah.
changing patterns. And so that's what really gave me insights into the patterns, the role that connective tissue plays and restrictions. And I had said for years, and I still say today, it was the best yoga teacher training I ever had was Rolfing School.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So
Well, and to get that background, I mean, it's some of that stuff is taught in certain yoga programs, but yoga programs that are like 200 hours, you can only really squeeze in so much anatomy into that. And a lot of it is, I think, the experiential part of it. I mean, even with massage school, I mean, you're only going to get so much. You're going to get the basics, or Rolfing school, you're going to get all the basics, but once you kind of have hands on people's bodies, this is, I became a trainer after I was a massage therapist. So, and I did a
mhm.
lot of like post rehab work with people.
Yeah,
So I got to both have hands on and watch movement. And I think, it just has informed. I feel like we have such a similar thing with that. Just informed so much about people's experience. And then also I started working with newborns, which was like a
yeah.
whole other level of like, where does, kind of back to our beginning of like, where do things start?
Oh
You
yeah.
start seeing things, that are, and even working with, doing prenatal work with women, I just start, getting such a better sense of like the whole of our experience that way too.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it. You follow your heart, you follow your hands. And as a person that's interested in working with bodies and whatnot, and then you keep learning and learning and learning and evolving, and uh, amazing things happen that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So my experience, I want to kind of go through this with you a little bit, and I just have questions regarding the practice now because I like you, I started doing, Pilates in my 20s and then got into yoga in my like late 20s and early 30s and really kind of pushed into it. And I was in New York at the time, so
hmm,
lots of yoga happening there. And I was also, new to doing movement work with people and kind of learning that whole, skill for myself too. So I've tried lots of different kinds of yoga, and I guess Avita's, probably closest cousin is some kind of a yin yoga, or there's so many overlapping pieces to it. But what I'm just curious to understand now, just from the way the practice works, and maybe you can just kind of explain a little bit about what an Avita yoga session looks like,
yeah,
and where your thinking came from, because I like the restorative nature of it. I felt like I think we both, just talking to you before, we both have this real understanding of like how the autonomic nervous system plays into how our physical body holds and manifests and all these things.
yeah. It's a massive, massive topic, and I'll start by saying Avita yoga is so different that I oftentimes resist explaining it or trying to describe it to people.
Yeah, I
And
get
I
that.
carry business cards with me that has a free pass on it, and I just say,
Yeah.
"Here, just
Yeah.
go try it." And but I can't do that here. I can't hand you a card, and you've already taken a class, so here I go. Um, I will say, since you brought the word yin up, it does have yin characteristics, but it also has very yang characteristics. We do a lot of work. There's very active work, and then there's
Hmm.
passive work. But in a nutshell, and this is hard for people to wrap their minds around because we're so conditioned to targeting the muscles. We want to make our muscles stronger. We want to make them more defined. We want to make them more supple. We we want to be able to see them. We want to stretch them and strengthen them and all these things. That's what, for the last probably 80 years, the whole fitness paradigm is centered around muscles. And no one goes into the doctor to get a muscle replacement, not yet anyway.
Right.
We go for knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacements. It's almost always when we go in to see a doctor or even a physical therapist, the muscle may be irritated, but it's always because of something else. As you know, the muscles are, they're told to activate or relax by the nervous
Hmm.
system.
Right.
Something is stimulating rigidity, something is stimulating the tightness. And if we only target the muscle, we're never really getting to the problem. So that's the whole idea that is fundamentally behind Rolfing. And that's where the
Yeah.
seed was planted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And lots of teachers came in and helped me understand the healing power of compression. And that's where it really starts to take off. Instead of strengthening and stretching, we use compress and release.
Hmm.
And it's to back up and go to a much higher level. It's why people buy weighted blankets. It's why if you ever saw the
Right.
movie Temple Grandin, I have my teachers in the teacher training all watch the movie Temple Grandin because she was this woman with autism and just couldn't control her thoughts and
Yeah.
a lot of anxiety and couldn't fit into the world. When she discovered it, she started to compress her body. She made her own at-home cattle chute where she compressed her body, and all of a sudden, calmness just came through her body.
Hmm.
And so we use that compress and release approach. We use the muscles to compress the bones. If you make a fist like I'm doing now, you squeeze your fingers in, and all those bones are getting compressed, which, as you know, is a requirement for bone density and bone health.
Hmm.
But what's going on inside the joints is quite miraculous. There's a cleansing process that's stimulated. I'm sure you learned it many times, but we just kind of learn it and gloss over it. It's the whole bone synthesis process. We have little cells called osteocytes
Hmm.
that 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 are stimulated and transform into bone. Or no, the osteocytes are the cleanup ones. They're like little Pac-Man. They go
Yeah.
around and they
Yeah.
clean up wherever bone isn't necessary. And and the osteoblasts are the ones that synthesize the bone. And that whole physiological process is stimulated under compression.
Mm.
And that's the essence of it. And that's how I've cleaned up arthritis in my knee. I've cleaned up shoulder issues from lots of racket sports in my youth. I had two major knee injuries skiing in my life. The other one was to my hip that I'm sure I would have probably replaced my hip by now because of the impact was so strong. But I continue to do the work that just keeps cleansing and healing and in a way resurfacing the inner workings of the joints.
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about it from the compression standpoint before. I mean, my quick take from doing it the other night was that it feels very similar to, I mean, it seems like fascial yoga to me in some ways. It's like I can sort of tell just from knowing you and understanding what the work was, that there was a fascial element to it, because the holds are like 2 to 3 minutes, and really you're just allowing tissue to settle in those ways. But it's
Mhm.
also the positions that they're in. I mean, nothing felt so uncomfortable like in terms of a stretch, and I think that's part of the goal too, because I think about that a lot with my work. I started out doing deep tissue massage work, and I still do that work, and trigger point work and myofascial work. But then
Mhm.
I started finding in certain situations that, you know, the, in certain situations, the low force part was much more beneficial for people. I mean, if someone comes into me with like, back spasms, or their sacrum's out of whack, or they got SI joint issue, I'll always start with, craniosacral work. And part of it is that it's kind of, softening that fascia, softening the joints, and tendons, and from the nervous system perspective, most likely in a lot of
Yeah,
situations. I mean,
for
the
sure.
the way I'm sure you've had some craniosacral work done, but our technique is more blend, with the tissue and the way the tissue is sort of organized. And there's a certain amount of just natural motion to the way tissue sort of, contracts and releases. So we sort of tune into that, tune into the craniosacral rhythm, and then just try to facilitate
Hmm.
from there. So it's as gentle as possible. But for me, that feels like the most profound thing in a lot of sessions is that the body is basically just organizing itself with my small amount of, help.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. That's what that term reorganization I use a lot. It was common in Rolfing school. We want to reorganize the body and find it release the places so that we have more options to stand and walk and just be in these bodies, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So on the kind of I'll say on the surface of a Vita yoga shape, there may be fascial adhesions or restrictions that you start to feel and you touch into, and as those release, then where do you go in the shape? Closer to the joints, closer to the bones. And so that's why we're always thinking bones and joints, because we've been so conditioned to stay out of the joints. Oh, my knee hurts, stay out of it. Even in traditional yoga teacher trainings where they're taught these days, well, it's been for many years, have a little bend in your knee whenever you do this or that shape.
Mhm.
But we'll never be able to protect our way into better health. If you protect your knee and you put a little bend in it all the time, and whoever really straightens their knee when they're cycling or running or going for a walk, we have to slowly go into the restrictions in that knee. I'm using my finger here, like a
Mhm.
knee, to get it to slowly start to straighten. And then all those connective tissues, the fascia in the back of the knee, they start to release. And then we get closer to the joint itself, and all those compressive forces go to work. And then you start renewing your knee from the inside out on a
Yeah,
regular basis.
yeah, yeah. I think that's an important thing to remember too, is that part of, doing any kind of training with your body is to train it for extremes, right? Because as you're saying, you can't protect every situation, like last winter here in Minneapolis, you might have been here for this, but
I
um,
heard all about it.
the just ice
Yes,
every single day.
yes.
I mean, it was like just warming up above freezing and then freezing every night. And I
Hmm.
treated so many, injuries from falls, and I even had to fall myself. And but your body just has to be responsive and reactive, and it has to know how to sort of like deal with an extreme, y- you know, position that it all of a sudden ends up in, and be able to like,
Recover.
recover from it too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's true. With so I just got through teaching a workshop on better balance. And the key, in my humble opinion, about better balance is, we can practice balancing all we want, but if we don't have ankle mobility and hip mobility and some freedom in the knees, no matter how hard we try to balance, there will be some sort of short circuiting. There'll either be rigidity somewhere or a little arthritis and a little bit of pain. And nobody's going to stand and balance or recover quickly from a little awkward situation if you bump into pain. Sometimes people feel that just putting their shoes on in the morning, oh, I got to adjust, I got to sit just to get my shoe on. And those are that's the kind of feedback that we want in Avita yoga, so we can go after those kinds of restrictions. And so you mentioned the word extreme. So yeah, we want to be able to adapt and adjust under those extreme situations. But how often do extreme situations show up, really? We
Yeah.
just want to be comfortable in these bodies.
Yeah.
day in and day out.
And speaking of recovery, I mean, I think part of the reason I wanted to have you on early in the year is because having done this in my practice for, 26 years, I recognize this time of year as a major recovery period with, I
Yeah.
think that there's the really the intensity starts somewhere in October or something for people in, with I see it with their people's work, flows changing, and then there's, the impending holidays and trying to get organized for all this. And if you have children, that adds another element to it. So I feel like this first week of January is always one of those weeks where everyone comes in and they're just I can just tell they're all out of sorts. And I even try not to like get into too much like, dialogue with them, just give them this chance to kind of fill back up again. And that was one of the nice things that I felt about Avita was that it does have this restorative element. And so I'm curious about, how you thought about organizing that. And then I assume there's probably, as you're talking about that there's sort of balance work and different kinds of, ways of looking at this. Do you structure then like a lot of yoga is sort of based on like levels, right?
Mm.
Is yours less levels and more kind of like horizontal in terms of how you
Yeah, it's a
think about
really good
organizing it?
question. Yeah. Well, for a shape, see, so I call them shapes. Most of the world calls them poses. And each time we pose, we drop into this, kind of a performance thing. And it gets a little tiny bit competitive, especially if there's mirrors in the
Yeah,
room and all that. So
right,
we
right.
never, when I taught in the studio, for 10 years, I owned a yoga studio here in Boulder, and I sold it just after COVID. And it opened up a whole new door to be online and travel more and stuff like that,
Hmm.
workshops, et cetera. But um, the I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, so I'm interested in like the so
Oh,
well I think
levels.
we
Yeah.
start with restorative on I mean I feel like there's a restorative part that's the basis somewhere in Avita, but with a lot of yoga as I was saying like it kind of does different levels, one, two, three or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas I
Yeah.
get the sense that yours is probably more horizontal, like it's not about going up, but about exploring in different ways, but in a very similar kind of place.
Yeah. 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 So um, the yoga has to be doable. It has
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
doable. We don't use poses, we use shapes. And they're very doable shapes. We take almost everything to the floor. So we're either lying on our back, we oftentimes have legs up on the wall, and we use strap a fair amount, we use the bolster in lots of different ways. And so the body has to be fully supported so that we can move into a shape and just to give a little description to it, we stabilize the whole body. For example, the back is on the floor, but then we might put the strap around the ball of the foot. And the minute you do that, most people think, oh, you're just going to stretch the muscle, and they'll initially start pulling the leg
Right,
for them and all
right.
that. No, we lower the leg and we start to straighten the knee, and we draw on the strap a little bit. And my job as a teacher is to walk around the room, and almost always I'm talking people off the edge. That's what I say to my teachers. You're going to spend more time talking people off the edge because they want to push, 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 and they're just going to get in their muscle and they're never going to get results. So you help them back off a little bit and find the first sensation that shows up in the shape. Is it in the back of the knee? Is it in the ankle? Is it in the toe? Is it in the hip? And that's the sensation that you work with.
Hmm.
And initially, the thought comes up, oh my gosh, this is a sensation that I've been avoiding. I thought I was supposed to stay out of this. Okay, but if you find your way into it now, what was once considered pain becomes healing sensation.
Yeah,
And it's deeply restorative, not just to the body, but to the mind. It's very peaceful, as you probably felt some of that.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I liked about it, and I'm sure this was by design a little bit, but coming into the class, I think the class I had maybe had 12 people or something.
Hmm.
And so 6 mats, against the wall with bolsters and a strap. And, there's the sort of simplicity of it, but also, I've been in plenty of yoga classes where you come in and you have to kind of like figure out where you want to put your mat and who you're next to and
Yeah,
all these
none
things.
of that.
And I feel like it takes some of that out. You just kind of you
Yeah.
and it also allows you to kind of stay in your own little space while you're doing it too, which also feels, very organized in terms of what I was looking for from the class too, because I knew I
Yeah.
had a feeling that it was going to be sort of restorative, and it was right after the Christmas holiday, so I was like really
Perfect.
ready for it. But that what you're talking about, people being afraid to sort of move their body through certain things, maybe because they haven't done them for a while. Is that just going to that place of resistance is enough. And that place of
Yes,
resistance
that's
for
it.
anybody, like talking about like using the strap for like a hamstring, or a back of the leg lengthening. What I've been in plenty of yoga classes where it's like competitive. You can almost
It's
kind of tell
competitive.
everybody around the room is trying to see how stretchy they can be. And there are some people who are drawn to yoga partly because they're already good at it. They're former
Exactly.
dancers or
Yes.
whatever. Whereas I did not go into it from that place. I was really, in a different place. And I found that I hurt myself, fairly regularly doing yoga.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
saw and I saw a lot of other people hurt themselves fairly regularly. And I think
That's
it
how
was
I
partly
learned.
right
Yeah.
because of, if you're not used to doing those kinds of extreme hamstring stretches or forward bends, your body is not gonna like that.
Yeah. And to what end? How long are you going to make your
That's just
hamstring
it.
before you don't realize the hamstring plays an incredibly important role in stabilizing the back of the pelvis?
Right.
Your
Right.
pelvis is going to spill forward. You're going to have a really hard time getting your low back to flex if your hamstrings are too long. And you've probably noticed this pattern where the upper back starts to flatten out because they try to stabilize. The only place left to stabilize is the upper back, which is ridiculous. You
Right.
can't hold yourself up from your upper
Right.
back.
Right.
So, yeah, so we don't target the hamstrings. Now, a little stretchy sensation, that's fine, but we're not going to try to stretch them.
Right.
And what people find as you ease the nervous system and unwind the nervous system and then release some of the fascial restrictions, as you have mentioned, all of a sudden your mobility gets better. And we start to realize there's a real difference between mobility and flexibility.
Mm, yeah.
And I'd much rather have mobility for life than flexibility for life.
Yeah. And the other part of yoga that I feel like it gets talked about, but I do a lot of work with this with people on the table, even when I'm doing craniosacral work, is thinking about how breath creates space,
Yeah.
and it's but I try to have it happen in a more passive way, which felt very similar to Avita, where it's about kind of the letting go process a little bit more, right? The thinking about that long exhale as being almost kind of like this low tide in the system, so that the
Yeah.
further it goes out, the more opportunity for breath to come back in there is, and that starts to create more space inside the body and kind of push out, on these tissues and
Yeah.
fascia, and I felt, and I could tell when I was in the class that I've done a lot more of that work for myself because I felt like I was incredibly loud with my breath. But
Oh,
that is the way that I work in general too.
uh-huh. Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Buteyko breathing method?
No.
Oh, yeah. Check it out.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the
How do you spell it?
BUT um, BUTYKO.
Okay.
Pretty sure. I have a tough time remembering that, but if you
Okay.
start it, you'll find it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, Dr. Buteyko was a Russian scientist tasked with um, getting the cosmonauts into space and getting them to function up there and get by with less oxygen.
Mm,
And so he figured so there's this Buteyko breathing method, which is what we incorporate in Avita Yoga. We de-emphasize the breath. We encourage just breathing through the nose, which is, I just take the fundamental elements of the Buteyko breathing method, but it's a vast topic uh, because most of us overbreathe.
mm,
And what I mean by that is anytime we breathe through the mouth, whether it's an inhale or an exhale, is over breathing because, and I'm going to make this as fast as I possibly can,
Okay.
because anytime we exhale too quickly, we blow off excessive CO2. And it turns out, if you really study the Krebs cycle, which is a monster, it
Hmm.
turns out the higher the level of CO2 your system is able to maintain, the greater the oxygen carrying capacity of your blood, and the greater the exchange of oxygen and energy within the cell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he encourages um, people to breathe only through their nose and breathe less. And there are various techniques that you use to raise. So ultimately, what we want to do is we start to raise the threshold of CO2 in the body, which is uh, causes a lot of anxiety in the beginning. So you just have to go very, very slow with it. And I do have a workshop that online that explains the whole thing, but it gets very intellectual and kind of heady. So I don't ever talk about it in the classroom. I just encourage people to breathe through their nose. And like you said, we can drop into the exhale. Little sips of air through the nose is generally enough because we don't get the heart rate going uh, strongly at all in Avita yoga. We're not there to get cardiovascular fitness or anything like that. We're there to heal. We're there to mend our bones and joints. And and just to be able to breathe for an hour or 45 minutes through your nose is extremely calming. We don't want to think about the breath unless there's the occasional cue to explore the movement of the rib cage, and that's a different thing.
Hmm. Yeah. So back to the sort of, the way Avita classes might be organized, if it's a practice that you're doing long term, there's probably a kind of, I'm sure, some sort of foundational principle aspect of learning Avita, but then as since you're talking about, there could be work, that focuses more on breath. Or on balance? Do you kind of do those as specific workshops? Or is there
Yeah.
other ways of how you approach that?
Yeah, because I found that it's usually a knee issue or a hip issue or a shoulder issue that get people into the practice.
Hmm.
It tends to be people in their late 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s that are drawn to the practice
Yeah.
because we somewhere in our life we kind of turn the corner and we realize we're not going to be Olympic stars, and we just want to lead happy, normal lives.
Right. Right.
So, uh, and
And stay active.
yeah, right, and just do the things that we love. And so that's what Avita's yoga is really about, is just being able to uh, do the rudimentary things that life requires and the things that you love. So, because people will find they have a knee issue or some sort of issue that brings them in, I do have a series of different workshops on my website that go into the details of the knee, for example, or the relationship between the hip and the low back. And I include 3 short practices that target those areas. There's a downloadable PDF with diagrams. Everybody gets the physiology talk that I do that helps people understand what's going on in their bones and joints when they do this practice.
Hmm.
It's inspiring and motivational to really understand that. So that's usually what gets people in. But then in the regular classes, everything is set up in a series of classes where we keep moving through the entire body in a systemic way, from the fingers, hands to the toes and the feet. There's neck work. Everything is just designed to reveal the blockages, spend a little time with it, and dissolve them.
Hmm. Yeah, I liked I think on the website, under one of the top headings was a moving meditation, which I feel like I've always, in the way that I've taught movement work, because I've also done a lot of rehab type work with people. I feel like my work has always been about really getting people aware and in their bodies. And I rarely have used mirrors in my work, because I find the more that people can become embodied and really feel what's happening in there, most of the time that just leads to better health.
Yeah, we want the biofeedback. We want it
Right,
coming from the
right,
inside.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so true. Yeah. Was there a question in there? I'm sorry.
No, I thought that was a great that was a great, thing to it was a good reminder. And also I think that that could be a huge draw, because I noticed that in the class that I took, there were some older people there.
Yeah,
There was actually a client of mine that was there too, so it was kind of interesting.
that's cool.
Um,
Yeah.
but there were also a couple of younger people who were newer to the class that were there, who seemed like they were probably in their, like, late 20s, early 30s. And I
Mhm.
can see where, again, because of this kind of restorative nervous system aspect of the work, and that meditative part, most people, once they get into their careers and working lives,
Yeah.
need to have these nervous system breaks.
Yeah, well, that's super cool. I went through a good part of my life trying to meditate, and I do the classic lotus posture or my version of the lotus posture, and I get the lights just right and get everything just right and try to sit and meditate and it never really worked for me.
Yeah.
And there were two things that really started to work for me when it came to meditation. One is, once I really established the idea that the goal for a lifetime is to know eternal peace, then my whole life becomes a meditation on a grand level,
Right.
to be able to realize I can see
It's a
differently.
lifestyle.
Yeah, it's kind of a way of seeing that we can start to change how we see the world. But then, but then the real aha came when, oh my gosh, I don't need to sit a certain way. In fact,
Hmm.
there's a meditation in every shape we do.
Hmm.
And then you drop into a shape, you feel into the sensation, the same way a meditator might use music or a candle flame to focus. We use the sensation. And then, and what I'll often say is there's only one skill we learn in Avita Yoga, and that is how to discern the difference between pain and healing sensation.
Mm.
If it's painful, you're not going to be able to stay there.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. It won't help. There's too much fear and too much resistance. But if you find your way in, the sensation that comes, you just know in your heart it's remarkably helpful and healing. And then you just want to stay there for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And it starts to change, it just starts to change in the moment. And then the time is up and we go to another shape. The mind never knows what's coming. It's very unpredictable of what shape is going to come next. So there's no anticipation. And it helps people really drop into, to use Eckhart Tolle's famous words, the healing power of now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
How much of this kind of teaching goes into, I know you're doing teacher trainings. How much of this kind of dialogue goes into teacher trainings? It feels like this must be an essential aspect of, bringing in some other, philosophy elements to the work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a way, we're just scratching the surface of many good topics. But yeah, we drop into the physiology, we drop into applied anatomy, we drop into um, all the all the different shapes and the variations on them and how to adjust somebody. Um, adjust is really not even the right word, but how to help them find healing sensation in the shape.
Hmm.
And and then certainly there's the people that are drawn to the teacher training are naturally inspired, like you and I. They just want to help
Hmm.
people. They want to see and understand the body in a different way. And there is a stronger, and I think this is what your question was leading to. uh, there's a pretty strong spiritual component to it where
Yeah.
now we have a group of people who really want to drop in and begin to understand the deeper undoing that brings the peace and happiness into our lives.
Yeah. And like you and I think a lot of people get led to wanting to do this work or wanting to teach because they had some challenge. I mean,
Yeah, it's
just
perfect.
every mine came from a back problem, but I work with
Oh
lots
yeah,
of talk therapists. Most of them came from traumatic backgrounds, and once you
yeah.
get past a certain point of that and do the hard work, and really engage in your own healing process, it seems almost like the right thing to do in some ways. I never felt like no one was telling me I needed to help people. I just really felt like drawn to that work as I was kind of, getting through things myself. And also, there's a part of it where I think you either feel like a teacher or you don't. I think when I was
Hmm.
younger, I had a thought. I was an English major. I wasn't really even going into the sciences. And and not that I didn't have interest in the sciences, I just wasn't drawn to that. I was much more drawn to like story and, stuff like that than I was to anything else. And I was thinking about writing school as kind of where I wanted to go. And so I started kind of after
Yeah,
college, I started going that direction. And being a musician, starting to use that, as for songwriting and stuff too. But then there was some kind of change that happened with me where I started realizing once I kind of got into the work, I'm actually good at using the words, and
hmm,
simplifying this so that I can deliver it to somebody and give them some small thing, and also having some sense of not overwhelming people with information, of being like, this is one thing I want you to understand, that kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah. Right. Yeah, yeah. That's a beautiful trait of a teacher, I would say, is to be able to distill something complex into something digestible and
Yeah.
easier to understand. Yeah, and I feel like one of the things that is very important to me, and it's an idea that I instill in the teachers that come to the teacher training. It's just so important is that we never ever stop healing ourselves. Not once should I think that I have something that you or another does not have. That's
Hmm.
what I love about, working toward a peaceful presence. I know it's in there. I know we all have that. And I know we all have resistance to it. And I know that we all have bone and joint issues. I know that there's restrictions in there. And I know we all have the physiology to change that. And so we're just guides, we're just guides to help people along the way and to kind of point them in these directions. But then whoever it is that's in front of me is a reflection of something for me to learn
Hmm.
and deepen and grow. And that's what develops what a real healing relationship. And it keeps it so fulfilling and so joyous,
Yeah.
and it keeps me out of my head and in my heart.
Yeah. And I think, I know you've probably run into this a lot, having been to ashrams and, studied this stuff for a long time, but it also it frees up the guruism,
Totally.
that relationship between, student and teacher that becomes a weird power dynamic sometimes, where and I started recognizing this right away with people, like, people wanted me to be this thing,
Yeah.
and I started resisting, more and more of realizing, like, no, I need to show my vulnerability, and I need to show my flaws more, and I need to let them know, like, I'm having a back issue today, like,
Hmm.
that for a while I felt like, I was, hiding all these things, and then after a while I
Hmm.
realized that was actually a strength in my teaching.
Yeah, it's just being honest.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, if you're in a body, you're going to have stuff to work with. There's no doubt about
Right,
it.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And then you can also stand for clarity. You can stand for happiness. You can stand for peace if you've had glimmers of it. And then you hold that. We can hold that container because I really feel, and I'm certainly not alone in this, when we heal ourselves, we heal for all. If
Right.
we are one, like the saints and sages have told us for centuries, if we are one, then my healing and my healing thoughts and my actions um, are not just for me. They're it's like a ripple effect. And I
Yeah.
don't need to understand that. I don't need evidence for it. I just trust it.
Yeah. I feel the same way, 100%.
Mhm.
And it happens, I mean, because especially in my work, I end up dealing with stuff that I think is sort of intergenerational, trauma or intergenerational, challenges that people sort of face within their families. And I think that's part of this week, coming back from the holidays is like, it's you can kind of get through it, and then there's the processing of it, and the processing happens in conscious and unconscious ways, and the body holds on to it in different ways. So, I think this is a great time of year to do this kind of work and
Mm,
really
totally.
really get some of that stuff moving so that we can kind of go through the healing from it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like driving down my street yesterday, I noticed people have tossed their Christmas trees out at the end of the driveway,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
and so this it's what's funny is, we do all this work, we get the tree, like many different rituals, we do all the work of the ritual, but then when it's over, we just, okay,
yep,
all of a sudden the value of it goes from 100 to zero in a
yeah,
matter of weeks.
yeah,
And I think that alone is worth kind of looking at the hoops that we feel like we're supposed to jump through,
yeah,
and then there we are doing it maybe not for ourselves but for others. And where's the self-healing in that?
yeah,
If we can slow down and reflect, and maybe next year we do one less thing at the holidays, or maybe a
right.
couple less things, just to have the peace and the joy, which is what it's really supposed to all be about, right?
Yeah. Or even just to make space after things,
Uh-huh.
I feel like I'm getting better and better at like, I want to go into the family situation and really enjoy it as much as possible,
Yeah.
and a lot of times, we feel like we're sort of, racing to the finish line and then we just drop at the end. That's the way I think a lot of people end
I
up doing
made
it.
it. Happy New Year.
But
Yeah,
and that's inevitable sometimes. But with that, then like make space for the recovery. Let that energy fill back up again. Give yourself time to
I
process
see.
that stuff.
Yeah,
Do some things that like doing some movement work or journaling or going for a walk, being in nature, doing something that actually just kind of like allows you to process those kinds of things. I think is helpful.
yeah, and we have 12 months to do it in, right? So you don't
Right.
want to sprint off the line. This is an
Right.
endurance. This is a
Right.
long-term
Yeah.
quote unquote race.
Right. But as you were saying earlier, I think what ends up happening, if your intention is for peace, then making this a lifestyle choice is really the important thing, and figuring out what those elements are. I mean, not everyone's going to I've come to realize not everyone's going to appreciate the kind of, work that I do, as a therapist, and I can't be for everybody. And I think probably this, I'm sure you feel the same way. Like Avita Yoga, you see the potential for it for everybody, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to gravitate towards it. But I
No.
think sometimes even if somebody ends up going through the process, they're going to learn something by going through it that might lead them to the next step, or maybe they'll sidestep and come back to it, or something will happen.
Yeah, yeah, it's a journey. Yeah, and that's why, so ironically, when somebody comes into the practice and they have a knee injury or a shoulder injury, at some point they're going to hear me say, peace is the goal. You may want that, you may be here for your knee, but let's actually make the healing of your knee second to using this thing that's upsetting you in your knee
Right.
to unwind your mind and make peace with it. Just make peace with what's going on. Even if you have to have surgery or go do something uh, along those lines down the road, if you're peaceful about it, your results are going to be so much better.
Right.
And with a peaceful mind, we could spend another many hours talking about what happens in the physiology and the nervous system
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
peaceful mind.
Yeah.
But we can go there quickly and just realize that when we do slow down and make peace the goal, and then you just kind of let yourself be guided through the shapes, uh, that's when the results come in quicker than people would
Yeah.
really ever imagine. It's the people that are intellectualize it and push it and need to know exactly how much and just they they're just more in their head than in their heart. Their results will come, but they're just going to be a little bit delayed, I've noticed.
Yeah.
And
I noticed the
eventually, if
exact
they
same
stay with it
thing.
long enough, they all drop into that.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed the exact same thing in my practice with because I offer different kinds of, touch basically, right? The craniosacral work is one way of working
Yeah.
and the massage work is another way of working. And if your experience has only been with massage work and that kind of pressure, you think that that's the only thing that's going to help you. And from my experience now, I think about it almost. That's why I really liked this kind of yoga was it feels similar to something like a craniosacral work where
Yeah.
I'm doing this very gentle um, kind of traction work. I usually start around the legs and feet, and I'm working around the base of the spine and the base of the head and neck, and it's really sort of like giving this opportunity for the body to just kind of open up and also settle. I think even if I've learned over the years now too, like after I know somebody's, body well enough for a while and they come in with something, I'll a lot of times just start out with a little bit of craniosacral work to kind of like settle them and then get into more, tissue work because I find that the body can kind of receive it a little bit more. Whereas if I go right in, I can tell there's a lot of protective response and a lot of, guarding and stuff that's already happening in the body. And part of that has been it's just trying to get through, whatever it was doing, since I saw them last.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the way is through, not over, not under, not around, but gently and consistently through the issue is the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like this kind of work, the Avita type of work, to me feels like something that the more that you practice it, the more that I think you can find that more settled state. I can just sort of tell like I'm gonna be taking some more classes, just so you know.
Nice.
It wasn't a one-time thing because I really feel like this is kind of something that I need to. Got a lot going on in my life right now. And I feel like, but it has to be, and I try to get people to think about this too, of like, how do you program these pieces in so that you have some consistency to it so that you don't end up with that sort of race to the finish line feeling all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty yucky feeling because if I'm racing to the finish line, now I'm anticipating, I'm not in the present moment. I have this idea that some advancement of the shape or the body or the life situation, some advancement of that is going to bring me happiness. But then when we get there, that state of mind is still there, and it's so whatever it is that we attain is still kind of fleeting. And again, that's why, you know, I'm not alone in saying this, that's for sure. Because if you really look at the Yoga Sutras and you look at the scripture and the writing that predated the yoga that we know that's come into America in the last probably
Yeah.
70 years,
Yeah.
it's all about finding peace in the mind. There's very, very little about the body in the Yoga Sutras. And so then we can take that idea. If I just right now, if you happen to be listening, you can just plant the seed for peace in your heart and let the unpeaceful things that show up remind you of what you really want. And then peace starts to become the guide.
Hmm.
And then I don't have to figure out what things to eliminate in my life. The things that are supposed to just kind of slip away or fall off just sort of naturally fall off because now I'm so clear on my target,
Yeah.
really in my heart and mind. And and that's the yoga. That's the yoga.
That's the practice
That
right
is.
there.
That's it. Yep.
So cool, man. I love
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Thank you
Can
very much.
what is are you I think you're just starting to do some, I mean, I know you're doing teacher trainings, you do the online work so people can, just so people understand how to interact with this work too. If they can't find Avita teachers in their cities, you have online stuff. And are you also doing like retreats, that kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I'm doing a retreat up in your neck of the woods, up in this fall. I have a retreat in Bayfield, Wisconsin. My
Oh
wife and I
yeah.
were up there. We were up there for about a week
Beautiful.
visiting friends. It's so beautiful. It's kind of my new favorite American town. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, it looks like time left it behind.
Yeah.
Like the original owners of the restaurants and the hardware store. It's just so cool.
Main Street, and then the
Main
giant
Street.
lake right there.
And then you're on the shores of Lake Superior.
Yeah,
In many ways looks like an ocean to
it
us
does.
landlubbers.
Yep, yep.
And no, it's just fabulous. So we found this great retreat center. That's in September. Um, I do have workshops. I'm coming to Minneapolis for a workshop in April.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty sure it's April.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And I'm guessing this is on the website, correct?
it's on the website. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll make sure that's in the show notes, but can you say it real quick just so we've got that too for
Uh, yeah,
listeners? Okay,
vitayogaonline.com.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, we hit a lot of topics today and just skimmed the surface of some of them,
Oh,
but
it's so fun. Yeah, it's perfect.
we may have to just decide on one topic to really get into next time.
Maybe we'll do that.
But
Yeah.
I wanted to introduce everyone to you. So thank you for taking the time to do this with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Jeremy.